little girl looked at the Alpha King and asked, "Why is my mother's photo in your castle?" Towering castles stood like silent giants against the sky, and the people whispered stories of curses, kings, and long-lost love. In the heart of this kingdom lived Ravener, the Alpha King. His rule was as cold and unyielding as the stone walls of his castle, and his heart, long ago shattered, had never known peace. The king, powerful and distant, walked the halls of his castle with the weight of 1,000 years on his shoulders. His eyes, dark and brooding, saw beyond the mere present. His mind was always caught between the past and the future, never fully in the moment. He had everything, land, wealth, armies, but it was all empty. Nothing filled the hollowness in his chest, not even the thousands of lives he commanded. Only one thing long ago had filled that emptiness: her. Her name was Elara, a woman of strange beauty and quiet strength. Ravener had once loved her with a fierce passion that consumed him. But that love had been shattered when she disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only a photo of herself, taken before she vanished. The photo now hung in the king's private chambers, a constant reminder of what he had lost and a source of haunting pain. Years had passed since Elara's disappearance, and in that time Ravener's empire had only grown stronger. Yet every night as he stared at her image, his heart ached with the question that never left him: where did she go? It was on a day like any other, when the wind howled through the castle's towering spires, that a strange visitor arrived. The girl appeared suddenly as if from nowhere. She was small, no older than 10, with wild dark hair that framed her pale face. Her eyes, however, were what caught the king's attention. They were the color of the forest after a storm, green and deep, like a hidden treasure. There was something in them that reminded him of Elara, something that stirred his soul. She was brought to Ravener's court by one of his servants, who had found her wandering in the castle's outer gardens. The girl looked up at the towering king, her gaze unwavering. "My name is Isolde," she said in a soft voice. "I have a question for you." Ravener, who had grown used to the endless bowing of his subjects, stood still. He studied her for a moment, sensing something unusual about her presence. The air seemed to thrum with energy, as if the very walls of the castle were holding their breath. The little girl stepped forward, her small hand clutching something tightly. She held it out to him, a faded photograph, one Ravener knew all too well. For a moment the king's heart skipped a beat. He reached for the photo, his fingers trembling slightly as he took it from her hand. It was the image of Elara, smiling in the sunlight, her eyes full of a secret joy. The girl looked at him, her expression serious. "Why is my mother's photo in your castle?" she asked, her voice soft but full of an unexpected weight. The question hung in the air, thick with meaning. Ravener's breath caught in his throat. The photo, how could she know? His mind raced, his thoughts colliding in confusion. He tried to compose himself, but there was something in the girl's eyes that struck him deeper than any enemy's sword ever had. Ravener began, but his voice failed him. He had never been a man to show weakness, never one to hesitate when facing a challenge. But this was different. The photo was a relic of his past, something he had kept hidden, buried beneath layers of pride and sorrow. He cleared his throat. "Who are you, child?" he demanded, his voice firm but with a hint of uncertainty. Isolde didn't flinch. She stared at him, unblinking. "I'm Isolde. My mother told me about you before she paused, her voice faltering for the first time. "Before she disappeared. She said you would know where to find me." Ravener's mind was spinning. Her mother told her about me. How could that be? Elara had vanished years ago, and there had never been a hint, not a single word, about a child. 1,000 thoughts raced through the king's mind, but none of them made sense. How was this possible? The girl continued, her voice growing softer. "She said that one day someone would ask you that question. She said it would be me. She said you'd be the one who could tell me where she is." The room grew colder, the shadows in the corners of the chamber seeming to stretch towards them, like the darkness itself was listening in on their conversation. Ravener's grip on the photograph tightened. She said, Isolde hesitated again, her small hands trembling slightly. She said she loved you. The word struck Ravener like a bolt of lightning. His chest tightened painfully. Alara loved him. He had always believed she had vanished out of fear, out of some secret betrayal he could never understand. But now, with these words, the pieces of the puzzle began to shift. Could it be true? Could there have been more to her disappearance than he had realized? Ravener swallowed, his throat dry. He looked down at Isolde, her innocent eyes waiting for him to speak. But what could he say? What could he tell her? His past was a labyrinth of regrets, and Alara's disappearance had been the darkest part of it. He had searched for her endlessly, as had his most trusted men, but the trail had gone cold. The only thing left were the memories and the photograph that haunted him every night. Isolde's voice broke the silence once more. "Will you tell me where she is?" she asked, her gaze never leaving his. Ravener closed his eyes for a moment, the weight of the world pressing down on him. He had thought he would never have to face this pain again. But now, with Isolde standing before him, he realized that perhaps this was a second chance to finally understand what had happened to Alara, to uncover the truth that had been buried for so long. He took a deep breath, his voice steady as he spoke. "I will help you, Isolde, but first you must understand something. What happened to your mother, what happened to her, is not a story I can tell lightly. There are forces at play that even I do not fully understand, forces that go beyond the boundaries of this kingdom. Forces that could change everything." Isolde nodded, her small face serious. "I understand, but I need to know. I need to understand why she's gone." Ravener looked at her, his heart heavy with sorrow. He had been running from his past for so long. But now this little girl, this mysterious child, had come to him with questions that could not be ignored. The castle's ancient walls seemed to close in around them as Ravener made his decision. "We will start this journey together, Isolde," he said, his voice firm. "But be warned, the truth is not always what we wish it to be." As he spoke, a gust of wind swept through the chamber, causing the candle flames to flicker. Outside, the storm continued to rage, as if the very heavens were warning them of the dangers ahead. But Ravener was no stranger to danger. He had faced countless battles, fought against armies, and survived the worst of storms. Yet, as he looked down at Isolde, he realized that this journey would be unlike any he had ever undertaken before. This time the battle was for the truth, and for the woman he had lost so many years ago. Cliffhanger. As Ravener and Isolde prepare to begin their search for answers, a shadowy figure watches from the castle's towers. The figure's identity is unknown, but their eyes gleam with a dangerous knowledge. They know more about Alara's disappearance than they are letting on, and they will stop at nothing to ensure that the truth stays buried. The days that followed were heavy with the weight of unspoken promises. Ravener, the Alpha King, had never been one to share his thoughts or feelings, and yet here he was, about to embark on a journey he had never anticipated. The little girl, Isolde, was a mystery to him, her presence like a ripple in a still pond, unsettling and yet impossible to ignore. He had thought his past was buried, forgotten, but it seemed that fate had other plans. Isolde had settled into the castle, though her presence felt out of place in the grand hallways that echoed with silence. The staff treated her with respect, though they couldn't help but whisper when they thought the king was not listening. Children were rare in the castle, and even rarer were those who seemed to possess the weight of a grown person's soul in their eyes. Ravener spent his nights pacing the floor of his chamber, the photograph of Alara still resting on his desk, the soft light from a single candle casting long shadows across the room. His mind was a storm, swirling with confusion and longing. What had happened to Alara? Why had she left? Why did this child now stand before him, claiming to be the key to unlocking it all? As the days passed, Ravener found himself drawn to the quiet moments when Isolde would sit by the window, gazing out at the distant mountains. There was a sadness about her, a quiet sorrow that seemed to linger around her like a shadow. She never spoke of her mother directly, but Ravener could see it in the way her eyes would glisten when she stared at the photo of Alara, now placed on a table beside her. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the kingdom in a soft golden light, Ravener sat across from Isolde, a distance between them but not as much as before. She was holding a book, its pages worn and old, though her fingers turned them with care. Ravener had never seen her this calm. In fact, he had never seen her speak unless spoken to, and yet there was something about her that made him want to understand her more. "I had a dream last night," Isolde said softly, breaking the silence between them. Ravener looked up, his dark eyes catching hers. "A dream?" Isolde nodded, her gaze distant. "It was about my mother. She was standing in a forest, but I couldn't see her face. There were shadows all around her, and she kept calling my name, but her voice sounded so far away, like the wind. I couldn't reach her." Ravener's heart tightened. The dream sounded like a memory, not a vision. Could it be possible that Isolde's connection to her mother was more than just blood? Was there some power in the girl that Ravener had yet to understand? "What do you think it means?" Ravener asked, though he already had a feeling he knew the answer. I think it means my mother is still out there," Isolde said quietly. "Somewhere." The words hung in the air, a promise that Ravener had long given up on. Somewhere. How many times had he searched the kingdom only to find nothing? And yet this child, this stranger with eyes like Alara's, believed with all her heart that her mother was still alive. Ravener didn't know whether to be comforted or terrified by her belief. Could it be true? Could Alara be alive after all this time? He had given up hope years ago, but now Isolde's words stirred something within him, something he had buried deep: hope, and with it fear. That night, Ravener decided to take action. He would not let Isolde's belief in her mother's survival fade into the shadows like so many other things in his life. He owed it to her, and to himself, to find the truth. The next morning, Ravener summoned his most trusted advisor, Elias, a man who had served him since his earliest days as king. Elias was a man of few words, but his loyalty to Ravener was unquestioned. His knowledge of the kingdom's hidden places and ancient histories was unparalleled, and Ravener trusted him more than anyone else in the castle. Elias arrived early, his footsteps echoing in the empty hallways as he made his way to the king's study. He was tall, with sharp features and a stern gaze that rarely softened. As he entered the room, Ravener did not greet him with the usual pleasantries. Instead, he went straight to the heart of the matter. "I need you to find something," Ravener said, his voice steady but urgent. Elias raised an eyebrow, his arms folded across his chest. "Something, Your Majesty." Ravener stood from his desk, walking toward the window that overlooked the sprawling castle grounds. "I need you to find out everything you can about Alara, everything. Her past, her family, any connections she may have had to the kingdom's magic, everything." Elias' expression shifted slightly, though he remained composed. "And what about the child?" Ravener turned to face him, his dark eyes narrowing. "Isolde, she is the key. She holds the answers, Elias, I'm sure of it." Elias studied the king for a moment, weighing his words. "Very well, Your Majesty. I will begin at once." Ravener nodded, but something in his chest clenched. He didn't fully understand why Isolde seemed so important, but there was no doubt in his mind that her arrival was no accident. Somehow their fates were entwined, and the truth of Alara's disappearance was waiting to be uncovered. Days turned into weeks, and Ravener found himself growing more restless with each passing moment. Elias' reports came in slowly, pieces of the puzzle that seemed to slip through his fingers whenever he tried to make sense of them. The answers were hidden, buried beneath layers of secrecy and magic. One evening, as Ravener walked through the gardens of the castle, he found Isolde sitting by a small pond, her reflection barely visible in the water. The setting sun bathed everything in a soft, golden light, and the air was still. For a moment, Ravener simply watched her as if waiting for something to happen. Finally, he spoke. "Isolde, tell me more about your dream, about your mother." Isolde looked up, her green eyes meeting his. There was a quiet strength in her gaze, one that Ravener had not seen before. "She was calling me again," Isolde said, her voice barely above a whisper. I think she's trying to tell me something." Ravener knelt beside her, his presence heavy yet not unwelcome. "What is she trying to say?" Isolde closed her eyes for a moment, as if listening to something only she could hear. "She says the truth is hidden, but it's in the forest where she disappeared, the place where it all began." Ravener's breath caught in his throat. The forest. He had avoided it for years, thinking it was cursed, a place where no one should go. But now, with Isolde's words echoing in his mind, he realized that the forest was the key to everything. The place where Alara had vanished, the place where it all began. His heart began to pound, the blood rushing in his ears. He had to go there. There was no other choice. Cliffhanger. As Ravener and Isolde prepare to venture into the forest, Elias returns with troubling news. He has found something, a piece of Alara's past that could change everything. But before he can reveal it, a figure emerges from the shadows, a person from the past, someone Ravener never thought he would see again. A person who knows too much, and who is willing to do whatever it takes to keep the truth hidden. The forest was unlike any place Ravener had ever seen. It stretched for miles beyond the walls of his kingdom, a place where the sunlight struggled to penetrate the thick canopy of trees. The air was thick with ancient magic, and the silence was deep, broken only by the soft rustle of leaves and the distant call of birds. It felt as though the forest itself was alive, watching them, waiting. Isolde walked beside Ravener, her small form dwarfed by the towering trees around them. She didn't seem afraid, not like most people would be in such a place. Instead, she seemed to belong here, her steps light, as though the forest was a second home. Ravener couldn't help but feel that the child was more connected to this place than she let on. There was something about her, something in her eyes that made him wonder if she knew more than she was letting on. The journey had been long, and Ravener's thoughts were consumed by the forest and the mystery of Alara's disappearance. He had spent years searching, but it was only now, with Isolde at his side, that he began to understand that the answers weren't going to be found in the castle or the kingdom. They were hidden here, in the heart of this ancient place. "I've been here before," Isolde said suddenly, breaking the silence. Her voice was calm, as though she had known this path her entire life. Ravener turned to look at her, surprised. "What do you mean? How could you have been here?" Isolde didn't answer right away. She stopped walking and knelt down to touch the moss-covered ground, her fingers brushing against the earth. "My mother told me stories," she said, her voice distant, as though she were remembering something long ago. "She said this place holds the answers to everything. That the forest remembers the past, and the magic of this place is stronger than anything we can understand." Ravener knelt beside her, his gaze fixed on the child. "Do you believe her?" he asked, his voice low. Isolde's eyes met his, and there was a moment of understanding between them. "I believe in what she told me," she said quietly. "I believe the forest knows the truth." They stood in silence for a long moment, the weight of their words hanging in the air. Ravener couldn't help but feel a sense of unease creeping into his chest. Isolde's mother, Alara, had been a part of this world long before Ravener had ever met her. There was magic here, a magic that had shaped their fates in ways they could never have imagined. And now, as they walked deeper into the forest, Ravener realized that the answers they sought were not going to be easy to uncover. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the forest floor, Ravener and Isolde arrived at a clearing. The trees parted to reveal an ancient stone altar, covered in moss and vines. The air around it felt different, charged with an energy that sent a shiver down Ravener's spine. He had heard of this place, stories told in whispers, warnings passed down through generations. The altar was said to be a place of great power, a place where the past and future could collide. Isolde stepped forward, her small hands outstretched as if she could feel the magic in the air. "This is where it began," she said softly. "This is where my mother's journey started and where yours will end." Ravener's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" Isolde turned to him, her eyes filled with a quiet understanding. "Your fate and my mother's were always connected. The curse that binds you both, it began here on this very stone. If you want to understand the truth, you must face it." Ravener's thoughts were a whirlwind. Ilara's disappearance, the curse, the mystery of Isolde's birth, it all led back to this moment. The answers were here, and yet something told him that the price of those answers would be higher than he was prepared to pay. He stepped toward the altar, his hand trembling slightly as he touched the cold stone. The air around them seemed to pulse with a life of its own, and for a moment Ravener felt as though the ground beneath him was shifting. The forest whispered, its ancient magic awakening as if it were alive, aware of their presence. Isolde stood back, her gaze fixed on the altar. "The truth is not always what we want to hear," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "But it is the only way to move forward." Ravener nodded, his mind racing. He had spent his entire life running from the past, burying the pain of his mistakes, his lost love. But now, with Isolde by his side, he knew there was no running anymore. The time had come to face the truth. Suddenly, the ground trembled beneath them. Ravener's heart raced as he reached for his sword, instinctively drawing it from its sheath. The air grew thick, the magic around them growing stronger, more tangible. Then, from the shadows of the trees, a figure emerged. Ravener's breath caught in his throat. It was a woman tall, with long dark hair that flowed like midnight. Her eyes, however, were what froze Ravener in place. They were the same as Ilara's, the same dark, mysterious eyes that had haunted him for so many years. The woman stepped forward, her gaze locked on Ravener. "You shouldn't have come," she said, her voice cold and smooth like the wind through the trees. "This place is not for you." Ravener's mind raced. Who is she? His hand tightened on the hilt of his sword. There was something about her that made him feel uneasy, as though she held the power to undo everything he had worked for. She was not just a stranger. She was a part of the past, a part of the curse that had bound his fate to Ilara's. "You know me," Ravener said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Don't you?" The woman's lips curled into a small, almost imperceptible smile. "I know you more than you think, Ravener, and I know what you've come for, but the truth is not something you can just take." Isolde stepped forward, standing between Ravener and the mysterious woman. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fear that Ravener could see flickering in her eyes. The woman's gaze softened, just for a moment, as she looked at Isolde. "I am someone who has been watching over you both, waiting for the moment when you would come seeking the truth." She turned her gaze back to Ravener. "But the truth comes with a price. Are you willing to pay it?" Ravener's heart pounded in his chest. The price. He had known there would be one. There always was. But what would it cost him? What would it cost Isolde? He looked down at the young girl standing in front of him, her eyes wide with uncertainty. She had already lost her mother once. Was he willing to risk her losing everything again? "I'm ready," Ravener said, his voice firm. "Tell me what I need to do." The woman's eyes gleamed, a dark satisfaction in them. "Very well, but know this, once you take the truth, you cannot undo it. It will change everything." Isolde's hand slipped into Ravener's, and for the first time since he had met her, he felt a spark of warmth, a connection that was more than just fate. It was something deeper, something that bound them together. As Ravener nodded, he realized that he had already made his choice. There was no turning back now. Cliffhanger. With a swift motion, the woman raised her hands and the air around them grew colder. The ground trembled again and the earth beneath them split open, revealing a dark abyss. "Step forward," the woman commanded. "Your journey into the truth begins now." Ravener looked at Isolde, whose face was filled with a mix of fear and determination. Together they stepped forward, ready to face whatever lay beyond the darkness. But as they crossed the threshold, Ravener felt a chilling presence behind them, a shadow that would follow them no matter where they went. The truth was waiting, but so were the dangers of the past. The darkness stretched before them, a vast abyss that seemed to swallow all light. Ravener felt a cold shiver run down his spine as the woman, who had led them here, stepped aside, her dark eyes gleaming with something almost like satisfaction. Behind them, the air pulsed with the magic of the forest, but here in this place, the magic felt different. It felt older, more ancient, almost alive, like the earth itself was breathing beneath their feet. Isolde clutched Ravener's hand tighter, her small fingers trembling. "Do not fear," Ravener said, though his own voice shook with uncertainty. "We must face this together." Isolde nodded, but her face was pale, her eyes wide with the knowledge that they were standing on the edge of something that could change everything. Ravener's thoughts were a whirlwind, spinning faster than he could follow. What had the woman meant by the truth? The woman had spoken of it like a force of nature, something that could not be undone once it was revealed. The truth, it seemed, was not just about the past. It was something far bigger, and that, Ravener knew, was the most terrifying part. The woman watched them, her lips curved into a thin smile. "You're standing at the edge of everything you've ever wanted to know," she said softly. "But remember, knowledge comes at a cost." Ravener looked down at Isolde, her eyes full of trust despite the fear that clung to her. He had promised her that they would uncover the truth, no matter what. Now, as the darkness seemed to pull them deeper into its grasp, Ravener realized that the choice was not just about finding Alara, it was about finding himself. "What must we do?" Ravener asked, his voice steady despite the anxiety that churned in his gut. The woman raised her hands, and the shadows around them shifted like living things. "Step forward," she said, "and let the truth reveal itself." Ravener hesitated for only a moment before he took a step forward, his heart pounding in his chest. Isolde followed, her small feet making no sound on the soft earth beneath them. As they crossed the threshold, a sudden coldness gripped them both, and Ravener felt as though the very air had turned to ice. The ground trembled beneath them, and a low, rumbling sound echoed in the distance. Isolde's hand tightened around his, and Ravener could feel her pulse quickening. The air around them seemed to thicken, pressing against them with an invisible force. Then the ground split open with a deafening crack, revealing a deep, shadowy pit. Ravener's breath caught in his throat as he gazed into the abyss. The air above the pit shimmered, and a vision began to form in the swirling darkness. At first it was nothing more than shadows, flashes of light and dark, but then it became clearer. Images appeared one after another. Ravener's heart lurched as he saw her. Alara. She stood at the edge of a vast, burning field, her hair whipping in the wind. Her face was full of sorrow, and her eyes were filled with a grief that cut through Ravener's soul. The images shifted again, showing Alara standing before a group of shadowy figures, her hands raised as if in a plea. The figures were cloaked in darkness, their faces hidden, but Ravener could feel their power, and he could feel Alara's pain. The vision changed again, this time showing Alara's face twisted with anger, her hands glowing with dark magic. She was not the woman he had known. She was something else, something far more powerful and far more dangerous. "Is this what you wanted to see?" The woman's voice echoed in the darkness. Ravener's breath was shallow as he watched the vision play out. He saw Alara's face as she cast a terrible spell, one that seemed to tear at the very fabric of reality. The shadowy figures around her were no longer silent. They whispered in her ears, urging her on. Ravener's heart raced as he realized the truth. Alara had not simply disappeared. She had chosen to vanish, but not out of fear. She had made a choice that bound her to the dark magic of the forest. She had become part of something ancient, something far beyond her control, and it had all begun with the curse that had bound her to him. "What did she do?" Ravener asked, his voice shaking with a mix of fear and sorrow. The woman's voice grew cold. "She made a pact. A pact with forces older than time itself. She knew the cost of the power she sought. She knew the price she would pay." Ravener's eyes widened. "A pact? With who?" The woman smiled, her eyes gleaming with dark amusement. "With the forest itself. With the magic that binds all things together. She sought to protect you both, but she underestimated the cost. And now that cost is about to come due." Ravener's stomach twisted. Alara had been trying to protect him. All these years he had believed she had left him, abandoned him. But now he understood. She had made a choice to protect him, and in doing so she had bound herself to something dark, something that could destroy them both. Before Ravener could speak, the vision shifted again. This time he saw Isolde, young, innocent, standing alone in a dark forest. She was holding a small, glowing stone in her hand, her eyes wide with confusion and fear. The ground around her was cracked, and the trees seemed to bend toward her, as if they were drawn to her presence. "Isolde," Ravener whispered, his heart aching. "What is this?" The woman's voice was softer now, almost gentle. "This is the beginning of your story, the moment when everything changes, the moment when the past, the present, and the future collide." Ravener's mind raced. The stone, Isolde, was this how it all began? His eyes darted from the vision to the girl standing beside him. Isolde's face was filled with fear, but there was something else in her eyes, something deep and ancient, as though she knew the power she held. The vision continued, showing Isolde as she stepped into the forest, the stone still glowing in her hand. The trees parted before her, and the ground beneath her feet began to crack open. The magic of the forest responded to her as though it were alive, as though it recognized her as its own. Ravener's breath caught in his throat. Isolde was connected to the magic of the forest. She was more than just a child, she was the key to the curse, the key to breaking it all. The woman's voice interrupted his thoughts. "She is the one who will end it, Ravener. She is the one who will break the curse. But first she must choose." Ravener turned to Isolde, his heart aching with the weight of the truth. "Isolde, you are the key. You can end this. You can end the curse that has bound us all." Isolde looked up at him, her eyes wide with uncertainty. "But I don't understand. What choice must I make?" The woman's voice was a whisper in the dark. "The choice is simple. She can either accept the power that the forest offers her, become one with it, as Alara did, or she can walk away, leaving the forest behind forever. But if she does that, the curse will remain. And Ravener will never be free." Ravener's heart pounded in his chest. The forest had taken Alara, and now it wanted Isolde. Could she really make this choice? He looked down at her, his heart torn between protecting her and the knowledge that the truth was too dangerous to hide any longer. Isolde looked at him, her small face filled with confusion and fear. "What should I do, Ravener?" Ravener's eyes were filled with sorrow. "I don't know, Isolde. I don't know if there is a right answer, but whatever you choose, I will be with you." Cliffhanger. The air around them grew colder, and the shadows deepened as the woman stepped closer, her eyes locked onto Isolde. "You will decide," she whispered, her voice like a promise. "But remember, once you choose, there is no turning back." Isolde's hand tightened around Ravener's, and as she looked into the abyss, the weight of the decision pressed down on her. The fate of them all lay in her hands.